where the goods are physically handed over, where the goods are physically transferred or physically handed over by the seller to the buyer. That is called actual delivery. Bill of exchange or other negotiable instruments have been issued, and if the amount is not paid by the seller, then you will be called as a unpaid seller. Where the goods have been sold on credit, but the term of credit has expired. Hello everyone, I am Arun Kumar, lecturer in Department of Commerce and Management, Vidhyaashram First Grade College, the Temple of Excellence, MYSURU. Dear students, welcome to this new session on unit number 2, that is the Sale of Goods Act 1930, and we are in session 4 of that particular unit. In the last earlier sessions, we discussed so many aspects with respect to the Sale of Goods Act 1930, and in the last session also I have told you that while you're answering the questions, please try to answer the questions with mentioning of the act and from which year it came into existence. Okay, and also we discussed in the earlier session with respect to what is Sale of Goods Act, what is Contract of Sale of Goods Act and all. And also we discussed if he is a non-owner of the product, how we can sell the product, and in what and all exceptional cases he can sell the product even though he is not a owner. This and all the aspects we discussed in the earlier session. So in this session, dear students, we are going to discuss few topics again with respect to the Sale of Goods Act 1930. So here now we are discussing about delivery of goods. Yes, delivery of goods. So what is this delivery of goods? For example, say you are the owner of the product and you sold that goods to someone else. Like say you are Mr. A. You are Mr. A. You are the seller. Okay. And you are selling the goods to Mr. B is the buyer. Okay, Mr. A is selling the goods, he is the seller, and Mr. B is the buyer of the goods, is called the buyer, receiver of the goods, or the recipient of the goods. So it's seller responsibility to deliver the goods to the buyer. So what buyer will do, for example, they are purchasing TV. Okay, Mr. A is selling TV to Mr. B. So what Mr. B will do, Mr. B pay 20,000 rupees. Mr. B pay 20,000 rupees to Mr. A. Now it's the responsibility of the seller, that is Mr. A, to deliver the goods. To deliver the goods to Mr. B. Right? That is called the process of sale of goods. So once the buyer pays the amount to the seller and the seller is supposed to deliver the goods to the buyer. This is the actual process or the general process what we can call. So what the Sale of Goods Act says about the delivery of goods. So what it says, Section 2 subsection 2. Section 2 subsection 2 of the Act defines delivery of goods means voluntary transfer. Voluntary transfer of possession from one person to another. Yes. So delivery of goods is nothing but voluntary transfer of possession from one person to another person. The possession of ownership or the possession of goods. Right. So voluntarily, without any conditions, without any confusions, without any misunderstanding, voluntarily the seller is supposed to transfer the possession of the goods or the possession of the ownership from him to the buyer. That is called delivery of goods. That means he is in the possession of the goods. He is in the possession of the owner. Right? So here Mr. A is in the possession of the ownership of TV. Right? So what will happen now? If the buyer pays 20,000 rupees to the seller, now the seller is supposed to voluntarily transfer the possession of the goods to the buyer. Got it? Yes. Such voluntary transfer can, as section 33 states, be made by doing anything which has the effect of putting the goods in the possession of the buyer or his authorized agent. That means transfer of possession or the transfer of ownership of the goods to the buyer or his authorized agent. If any authorized agent is there with respect to the buyer, then we are going to deliver the goods or transfer the possession of the goods to that particular agent. So here delivery of goods is nothing but, as per section 2 subsection 2, voluntary transfer of possession in one person. The transfer from one person to another person is called delivery of goods. So here what we will do, whatever section 33 states with respect to delivery of goods, according to that we are supposed to transfer the goods or deliver the goods. As a seller, we are supposed to deliver the goods from our possession to the buyer possession or to the buyer's authorized agent. This is the meaning of delivery of goods under the Sale of Goods Act. Next, modes of delivery. So we have different modes of delivery, right? We have different modes of delivery. The first one is actual delivery. So what is this actual delivery? Actual delivery is nothing but where the goods are physically handed over. The goods are physically handed over by the seller to the buyer. The delivery is said to be actual. So what is this actual delivery? Actual delivery is nothing but where the goods are transferred, where the goods are physically handed over, where the goods are physically transferred or physically handed over by the seller to the buyer. That is called actual delivery. Okay. So what Mr. A will do, he transfer the TV. Okay. He hand over the TV to the buyer. The seller, for example, if he is selling a TV, he hand over the TV to the seller. That is called the actual delivery. Okay. For example, this pen. If any person purchases this pen, okay, as a seller, what I am supposed to do? I am supposed to hand over this pen to the buyer. Okay, I am handing over this pen to the buyer. So this is called what? Actual delivery. Okay, this is called actual delivery. So where the goods are physically handed over by the seller to the buyer, the delivery is said to be actual. Next, symbolic delivery. So what is the symbolic delivery? Where the goods are bulky and incapable of actual delivery, there are other means of obtaining possession of goods are delivered by the seller to the buyer. Yes, here where the goods are bulky and incapable of actual delivery. If the goods are too much, if they have heavy goods, if it is not possible to deliver actually, what they'll do, in one or the other mode, they deliver the goods to the buyer. The seller, in one or the other modes, he deliver the goods to the buyer. That is called symbolic delivery. That means where if it is not possible to deliver the bulky goods or incapable of actual delivery, there are other means of obtaining possession of goods are delivered by the seller to the buyer. So in one or the other way, they deliver the goods to the buyer. The seller deliver the goods to the buyer. That is called symbolic delivery. Next one, constructive or delivery by attornment. Constructive or delivery by attornment. So what is this called? Where the goods at the time of sale, are in the possession of the third party or third person. Where the goods at the time of sale are in the possession of the third party, there is no delivery by seller to buyer unless and until such third party or the third person acknowledges to the buyer that he holds the goods on his behalf. Yes, for example, buyer, the dealer and the seller. We have three parties: seller, dealer and the buyer. So if this dealer is holding the ownership or if he is in the possession of the goods, then the owner is not going to, the seller is not going to deliver the goods. This particular person only, the dealer only going to deliver the goods to the buyer. For example, Flipkart. You can take the example of Flipkart. So someone is selling the goods in Flipkart app, okay, and someone is purchasing. This Flipkart is going to act as a middleman, okay. So now that person packs and send it to who? The actual owner. The actual seller packs and send it to Flipkart. So now Flipkart is in possession of that goods. So now they deliver it to you, okay. So now here he is not delivering. He is not delivering. Now Flipkart is packing it and delivering it to you. Amazon, they'll pack it for you and they'll deliver, okay. That is the best example for constructive or delivery by atonement. So these are the different types of modes of deliveries what we have. Next, unpaid seller. So who is this unpaid seller? So according to section 45 of the Sale of Goods Act, the seller of goods is deemed to be an unpaid seller when the whole of price has not been paid or tendered. So who is called unpaid seller? According to section 45 of the Sale of Goods Act, the seller of goods is deemed to be unpaid seller when the whole of the price has not been paid or tendered. See, yet the whole amount of that particular product is not paid by the seller, then is called unpaid seller. For example, I purchased from another person, okay, I purchased from another person, but yet I am not paid the amount, okay, yet I am not paid the amount to the person who sold the goods to me. If I am selling it to someone else, if I am selling that goods to someone else now, then I am called as an unpaid seller. When a bill of exchange or other negotiable instrument has been received as conditional payment and the condition on which it was received has not been fulfilled by reasons of the dishonor of the instrument or otherwise. So what will happen once the bill of exchange or other negotiable instruments have been issued, and if the amount is not paid by the seller, then you will be called as a unpaid seller. You can't sell it to someone else until you pay the payment to the actual owner of the goods, okay. Only once if I pay the goods value to the actual owner, then I can sell it to the another party. If I am not yet paid, then I will be called as a unpaid seller as per the section 45 under the Sale of Goods Act. Rights of an unpaid seller. So what and all the rights an unpaid seller will be having on the goods? Goods are in possession of him, but yet the amount is not paid to the seller. An unpaid seller has twofold rights. He has twofold rights, that is, right of an unpaid seller against the goods. The right of an unpaid seller against the goods and right of an unpaid seller against the buyer personally. Yes, he'll be having two rights, that is the right of an unpaid seller against the goods. Okay, he'll be having the right because he is in the possession of the goods is transferred to him, but yet the amount is not paid. But still he will be having the right to defend himself that the product belongs to him because he is in the possession of the goods. The second thing is right of an unpaid seller against the buyer personally. Yes, he will be having the right, that particular unpaid seller having the right against the buyer personally. That means he'll be having the rights. Okay, you'll be in the possession or you will be having the ownership of the goods, but the amount is not yet paid. So you'll be having all the rights against the goods, even though he is a unpaid seller. So right of an unpaid seller against the goods. So what and all again the rights the unpaid seller will be having? So he sold the goods, but yet the amount is not paid by the buyer. Okay, I sold the goods, but yet I am not paid the amount to the buyer. The buyer has not paid the amount to the seller. So seller will be having few rights until the amount paid by the buyer for the purchase of a product. Okay, so I am the seller, I am selling the goods to someone else. So the amount is not paid by that particular buyer, then again still I will be having the rights on the product which I sold to a person. So which are those? Right of lien. So what is this lien? So what is lien is nothing but the amount, whatever the product we sold, yet if you not received the debt with respect to that product, then the ownership still belongs to me only, to the seller only. So I have sold on credit basis. I sold the products on credit basis, yet the amount is not paid by the buyer. So still I will be in the possession of the ownership of that particular product or the goods. Next, right of stoppage of goods in transit, right of resale. Yes, yet the amount is not paid by the buyer for the seller for unpayment, for not making the payment. The seller can stop the transit. That means the seller can stop the transportation of goods to the buyer place and he can sell it to the another person. He can resell the goods to another person. So if the amount is not paid, if the price is not paid by the buyer, if it is unpaid by the buyer for purchase of goods from the seller, seller will be having the right of lien and right of stoppage of goods in transit, and he can reissue the right of resale. That means he can resell that product to the someone else, because yet the payment is not received. Maybe the product is in the possession of the owner, that is the buyer, but the payment is not received. So until the payment is received by the seller, you cannot decide that the buyer is the actual owner. So these are the rights of the unpaid seller against the goods. That is the right of lien and right of stoppage of goods in transit, that is in transportation, and right of resale. Next, right of lien, section 47 to 49. Right of lien, section 47 to 49. So lien is the right of an unpaid seller to retain the goods in his possession and refuse to deliver them to the buyer until the full payment of the price is made to him or the price is offered to him. That means, so in this particular thing, that is right of lien, what the owner will do, the seller will not deliver the goods. The seller will not deliver the goods to the buyer until the amount paid by the buyer. So the seller can refuse to deliver. The seller can refuse to deliver the goods to the buyer until he make the full payment, price is made for him or the price is offered to him. So for whatever the price the seller sold the goods, until that amount received by the seller may deny to deliver the goods to the buyer. So here the unpaid seller can exercise lien only in the following cases. So unpaid seller can exercise this right of lien only in few cases, that is where the goods have been sold without stipulation to a credit. Okay, where the goods have been sold without stipulation as to credit. So when the seller sold the goods without stipulation as to credit, that means if he once told that the goods can be sold in credit, yes, obviously you can't take back the goods from him and you can't say that you cannot deliver. That should be without stipulation as to credit. Then only you can perform the right of lien. Next, where the goods have been sold on credit but the term of credit has expired. Yes, in case you sold it on credit basis to a buyer, buyer failed to pay the amount, he failed to pay the installments to you. If the credit period is expired, then again you can tell the buyer that you will not deliver the goods to the buyer. Next, where the buyer becomes insolvent even though the period of credit may not have yet expired. That means even though the credit period is not expired, if the buyer fails or if buyer becomes insolvent, if he becomes not able to pay the amount, okay, if he becomes insolvent, then at that time also you can perform the right of lien. Next, where the unpaid seller has delivered a part of the goods, he may exercise his lien on the remaining part of goods. Yes, where the unpaid seller has delivered part of goods. So he sold it on credit basis also. Okay, he sold the goods, only part of goods is transferred, but yet the amount is not paid. So at that time, whatever the remaining part of goods he will be having with him, the remaining part of the goods, he can exercise this right of lien with respect to that particular unpaid seller. Next, termination of lien or loss of lien. So what is this termination? An unpaid seller of goods loses his right of lien on the goods in the following cases. So sometimes he may lose the lien, the right of lien, on few cases. Which are those cases? By delivery to the carrier. By delivery to the carrier. When he delivers the goods to a carrier or other bailee for the purpose of transmission to the buyer without reserving the right of disposal of the goods. That means, as a seller, sometimes you are going to appoint third party to transfer it from your place to the buyer's place. At that time, he delivers the goods to a carrier or other bailee or other purposes of transmission. So here he appoints someone and he will be delivering those goods to the buyer. At that point of time, the buyer, without reserving the right of disposal of the goods, the loss of lien will occur. Next, by delivery to the buyer. Again, by delivery to the buyer. When the buyer or his agent lawfully obtains possession of the goods, unpaid seller loses his right of lien. Yes, when the buyer or his agent lawfully obtains a possession of goods. So once, by delivery to the buyer, once the goods is delivered and lawfully if he possesses the ownership, the buyer possesses the ownership of the goods lawfully, legally, then you can't perform the right of lien, you will lose the right of lien. Next, by waiver. When the seller expressly or impliedly waives his right of lien, the right of lien is terminated. So sometimes if the seller waives whatever the amount is supposed to give, at that time, whatever the amount is supposed to give given by the buyer, at that time, the loss of lien, the right of loss of lien will occur. Next, by tender of price. That means where the buyer tender price for the goods purchased by him, seller lien is lost. That means here, by tender of price, where the buyer tenders price for goods purchased by him. So when the goods is purchased by the buyer and whatever the price is supposed to pay, by the buyer, if he is going to make the payment, then the seller lien is going to lost. So in those situations, the seller is going to lose his right against the goods. So with this, I'm going to wind up this session. So I'll come up with few more new topics in the upcoming session. Until then, thank you all. Have a nice day. Namaste.